And I work for Atlassian. I specifically work on Bitbucket, Bamboo, Fisheye, and Crucible. So all things server developer tools. Bitbucket, if you're not aware, which is what we're mostly talking about today, is a competitor to GitHub and GitLab. It's a Git hosting platform that, in this case, is behind the firewall. So the primary focus really is on that security compliance lens of Git hosting and collaboration.
And I'm Craig Peters. I'm a product manager here at JFrog, and I'll be talking about how the JFrog products work together with Bitbucket to improve the developer experience as we go forward.
So a little bit more details on Bitbucket, just in case you're not familiar. Bitbucket server was originally Stash, so you may have heard of it, and we just hit our 6th birthday. And there's also Bitbucket Cloud, which hit its 10-year anniversary recently. And both of those are really focused on development for professional teams. What does Git collaboration look like for professional organizations and businesses that are working on intellectual property, but still need to benefit from open source? So that's where you may see us differ somewhat from GitHub and GitLab, where their primary lens really is more on being a social platform, as well as Git collaboration, and looking more towards open source for how they should improve and the workflow that they go through. The screen cap you see here, that is our normal pull request experience, but you'll be seeing more of that here shortly.
So what I'm going to walk it through real quickly is how the JFrog products work together with Bitbucket to work with the developer. So this is kind of a portion of the whole ecosystem view that JFrog presents, and I'll dig into that. So what you see here is the developer is kind of the center of the world here in terms of how they drive the creation of software, how developers, you are the ones who are creating, all of the valuable things that we're focused on. So essentially, a developer will declare some new dependencies, and that's one of the things that you do when you're writing software. And in the demo today, we're going to dig into a simple Maven project and declare some dependencies. In this case, we'll use Maven, but JFrog and our products are very polyglot. We work with really any of the application environments and stacks that you will use, everything from mobile things like CocoaPods. There are a couple things we've added since this chart was created. We've added Go versioned modules, which are now part of Go 1.11. We have support for R as well, and in the form of CRAN and a bunch of other stuff. So the idea here is that you declare those dependencies, and then you do a build which resolves those dependencies through Artifactory, and it's done typically by triggering it via commit through a version control system. That will then do the resolution of those dependencies, create some build artifacts, and then put those back into Artifactory. And then the value here is that we're actually doing things like proxying public repositories, so you can put in place policies about how you resolve those dependencies. You can either allow developers in certain projects to have access to any of the repositories on the internet that you want them to, or in other projects you may constrain access to certain repos. And as the software goes through its life cycle, you go from initial development to QA to staging to production. You can put in place policies about what packages are allowed in each of those environments. And then X-Ray is actually the engine that implements those policies. You place those policies in X-Ray. X-Ray then will either create an alert or block a build, and we'll take a look at that in the demo. And then we work with any of the build tools that you would like to work with. And the point of what we want to show today is that while we're doing all of that, we can expose that information in a very transparent way to the developer through the Bitbucket UI. So in addition to sort of orchestrating all of this, JFrog works with a whole host of tools to automate the end-to-end process of making software liquid all the way from the developer to production. So we focus on capturing not only the build artifacts, but all of the metadata required in order to make that possible to automate as much of this end-to-end flow to production as your business is able to accommodate. And so what this does is this gives you the freedom to decide which tools, which policies, where you want to automate, where you want human interaction to take over. And so that's the kind of the big picture. So what we'll do is we'll drill into how you can expose information about your builds and about the security of those builds right into your pull request in Bitbucket. And so Alice, I'd like to invite you to sort of add any color that you'd like to hear.
Do you want me to touch on Code Insights first to give that context?
Yes, please.
So Code Insights is one of our newest releases in Bitbucket, and the intention is that it allows integrations like JFrog to expose this information, these build results, scan results, whatever other information you need, post pull request, post the opening of a pull request. And so rather than just getting a pass-fail build status, what you're actually getting is all of the results from those tools right in the Bitbucket UI and a direct link back into the tools. So it's intended to simplify the overall workflow and process and give you a visual indicator with additional details and additional information to help you close and resolve pull requests faster, as well as improve code quality. And this is iterative in that JFrog already had an existing integration, and this just allows a deeper and nearly native feel to that.
Yeah, we're very excited about this opportunity that the Bitbucket team has presented us to expose additional information in a more natural way, in the sort of the sort of natural workflow of the developer in the context of a pull request. So I think without further ado, why don't we take a look at it? What do you think?
Let's do it.
So let's do it. So I'll start actually with sort of how you get it. So JFrog, we've published the integration as an add-on in bitbucket.org. And I'm in the process right now of getting the marketplace listing for this. So it will soon be available in the Atlassian marketplace. I think there's just a couple more days for the review to go through. And what it consists of is a couple of configuration files and a shell script. And what that means is that it can work with any CI server. If you're using Travis or Circle CI or Jenkins, it'll work. And in the demo today, what I'm going to do is just to illustrate that point, I'm actually going to trigger it manually. So let's take a quick look at my Bitbucket installation. So I've got kind of a demo project set up with a sample application here in Maven. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a couple of simple little operations. Let's take a look at it. I'm just going to change something in the COM files to trigger a rebuild. So let's bump the version. And then I'm going to do just git add. Oops, got to type it right. Add a little commit message. And then let's push it. And what I've done is I'm pushing it to my branch. And I'll show you why that's true in a minute. So I haven't saved my credentials. just log in, push everything up. And so now what I'll see when I go and create a new pull request is I should see that commit. So let's create a new pull request from my branch. There's my commit. Let's just, let's make a branch. Let's create a pull request where we'll put a bunch of commits on here. So I'm really going to refactor the UX. You've seen I've walked through this before. Let's go ahead and create that. So now I've got a pull request, which has my commit, and I can do a number of commits here. What I'm going to do is simulate the build system actually triggering an automated build here. So this is the shell script that includes all the logic that uses Artifactory to do a Maven build and resolve all of the dependencies from Artifactory. And then what it's doing is it's doing a scan. So, and then once it's done that scan, it's actually uploading all of the results into this pull request. So in this pull request, I'm just refreshing it. We'll now see some nice little information that's available to me as a user. So as a developer, I can see here this additional little card. And in this card, I see the Artifactory has some information here for me. It tells me the information about my build name, the build number, what was uploaded. So I created a war, my SHA, information about my things. And here I can just click on this and it'll take me right to Artifactory into that build info. So what information has Artifactory captured about this? Let's just take a quick look. First thing I want to do is I want to log in so that I can see all the things I have rights to see about this build. So I can see I've got my project. I've now revved the version to 0.3 as I did. Because I've used Artifactory to do this build, I can see both of the artifacts that were created, the war file and the POM. I can go directly to those artifacts, and show them in the sort of Maven browser. And the nice thing about Artifactory is the way this build works is it will do the same exact thing if I'm doing, say, a Docker build or NPM, or I'm resolving to RPMs, right? It works exactly the same way. So I've got the artifacts I've created, and then I've also tracked the exact versions of all of the dependencies that I've created through this build. So you can see here I'm depending on a bunch of things. A bunch of these turn out to be transitive dependencies, and we'll take a look at that in a second. The other really handy thing that we've done through this build integration is to capture a bunch of information about the environment in which this was built. And this is super handy because, say, for example, in this case, my build was successful. If it had not been successful as a developer, I would see that in the pull request in the Code Insights panel. But if it had been broken, it's really hard for me to really understand exactly what the issue is. But I can actually just go and compare my current build against, say, a previous working build. So I can see exactly which artifacts were updated, which ones were removed. So I can see in this case it removed the old version because I revved the version number. I can see all of the things that were unchanged. In this case, I didn't really change much at all. The only thing that's changed is the git commit hash. Right? Everything else is the same. So it's kind of clear why it succeeded. It succeeded because my last build worked. But if it had been broken, then that would be clear now. So now that we've kind of taken a look at the build info, let's go take a look at the X-ray panel. I can see here the X-ray failed. Well, there were a couple of alerts, and let's take a look at the details about that. So why would it have failed? Exactly what are these alerts? So if I go into X-ray, this takes me directly to the information about the scan for this build. And I see right away, I've got a bunch of issues. I've got 66 violations here, and maybe I'll look at all the critical ones here. And I can say, well, what are these? If I look in here, I can say, well, I've got some improper input validation. That's the CVE that's pretty dated from 2016. And I can see that it comes from this particular component, stretch2 core. And I can see, well, I'm using version 2.3.16, and here are the list of all the infected versions. well, that gives me some pretty good clues about what I might want to do to correct that. So this is super handy because I can actually then drill into each of these components. I can say, well, where, what versions of struts 2 issues? Well, in this case, I can see that this version of it has critical issues. You can see it's got those 49 security violations. But look at this. There's if I look up here, I can see what's the latest public version. And in fact, I can see that some other people in my organization are already using later versions of this component. So, and I can see that they pass all of our policies. So maybe all I need to do is go and update the version. So let's try that. So you'll see, since I've walked through this demo once before, I had already done that. Let's just switch which version of that dependency we're using. Oops. So I'm going to comment this guy out. So I don't want to use that vulnerable version. And then I'm going to add this to my git commit. Okay. Let's just push this back up to my branch. And citing. And let's redo the build. That triggered the build, right? So once I've done that, actually, let's make sure that succeeds. Everything's good. Let's refresh this guy. And there it is. I no longer see the alert. Now I can see that Artifactory is good and X-Ray has passed. So if I go look at my build in X-Ray, whoops, I went to the general link, my bad. I went to more details link. So I'm looking at that build and now my build is good, it's clean. And so what I have is an automated system that triggers based on the status of that would then continue to push it, say, to QA. Let's take a look at how I had set that up. So let's talk a little bit about what X-Ray is. X-Ray is a tool that connects to Artifactory, understands the structure of packages. So it actually takes rules based on what packages you have watches on, downloads them, unpacks them, meaning if it's a Docker image, it understands NPMs, jars, wars, tar-gzs, zip files, everything that's in any kind of package, unpacks those and does that in a recursive way, creates a dependency graph. That dependency graph is then used for all kinds of purposes. First, in this case, we're doing it for a scan to check whether or not any policies are violated. And the particular watch I had set up here is this watch Maven commit builds, right? And so this watch is set to look at my particular branch, or my particular build, sorry, that came from my branch. And I have a couple of policies, a security policy and a license policy associated with this. So I can get notifications about what is exactly in those things. So as a developer, I have some very deep insight into the kinds of dependencies that I've created. And then I can, if we take a look, say at the security one, right, I have this set so that the rules are set so they can things like fail to build in an automated way. Not only create a notification or a violation in this case, but also fail the build if there are any kind of issues at all, right, that I find in that. And those policies are very flexible. I can either search on severity level, I can search on CVSS score. And what this kind of flexibility allows me to do is it allows me to set different policies at different stages of my software development lifecycle. So as a developer, in this case, I'm kind of doing commit level builds. I would have a different, this is, in this case, I would have one sort of policies that kind of tell the developer about only the most critical things so that then they can go and make those changes before they push things into a branch that would then, say, go into a nightly build. I know I sort of named mine nightly, but really this is like a commit build level policy. And you can also get insights into components. So in this case, if I go look at, this is actually the view that the system took me to. This is the component level view. But I can actually look at the struts component, for example. There are more than one strut component in here, so I can go look at the struts core component. I can understand which versions of it are good, which ones are not, what licenses are in it. And I can understand exactly where this is being used, right? So I can see which builds, which versions of which projects are including this, and where they were included, which builds those were included in. So I can see for older versions, for example, I can see all of the different versions. So this gives you visibility into the kind of component graph that is created by X-Ray. What that allows us to do is when new vulnerabilities are found, and we all know that every open source and commercial package we use have some level of vulnerability. When those are discovered, this will then generate in an automated way violations associated with those policies they have associated with those package types. So I have policies here, for example, to watch. So I have watches, for example, that have policies. Those watches are doing things like watching all of the things I resolve from JCenter. So this allows me as an administrator to have very deep insight into what kind of dependencies all of my projects and all of my developers are creating. And in this way, I have deep insight into what's going on in my tools. Another really handy thing with this is, let's go back to my build. Really handy thing is when you're doing release management, one of the very difficult tasks that a lot of people have is to understand what licenses are included. So we include a really handy report so you can export all of the licenses that are in a build as a CSV or a JSON that you can then go and format into a third-party kind of about box release. So that's a super handy feature. So what all of this gets you in the end is, as a developer, I understand right in the context of the pull request, which I'm trying to do, what's good, what's bad, what do I need to change, how do I need to proceed in order to get the actual packages that I'm creating to be shipped into my branch. So in this case, now that I know it's good, I can take my refactored branch and merge those pull requests into master, and everything's good. So with that, I would like to stop sharing. Oops, what do I mean? I want to share. I want to switch back to the presentation and allow Alice to talk a little bit about where we go from here.
Yeah, so there's a couple of this integration that you've seen so far is the core of what JFrog and Bitbucket look like together. And with Bitbucket, you're really getting a very deep integration with other Atlassian products like Jira, whether you love it or you hate it, Bamboo. But more than that, there's also a few workflows that we've worked to incorporate. So if you're looking at something like updating a dependency and that needs to go into 2 working versions. So that needs to go into 0.13 as well as 0.14. We have what's called cascading merges. So once a pull request is merged into one, you can have that automatically flow back. Say you merge into 0.14, that can automatically be merged into 0.13. So that way you're having consistent releases. Another aspect of that is if you need to retarget source branches once you've deleted it, if you need to retarget pull requests once you've deleted a source branch, say you're trying to merge into dev and you're deciding to delete dev, but you still have a couple of open pull requests, you can retarget those to a master stable branch. And that final piece, looking at the integration side, if you are looking at a change set and something comes up and someone says, hey, actually, we're getting alerts on this, we really need to change it, but that isn't an organic change in the, or an organic alteration in the change that you are making, then what you can do is you can just create a JIRA issue straight from that Bitbucket pull request experience and work on that separately, since they are separate streams of work, and you'll get detailed information about any of the JIRA issues that have been opened or mentioned. So that way you're not having to jump between different platforms. But each of those pieces really takes some of this information that JFrog provides and helps simplify that workflow, so that you're not having to jump through multiple hoops in order to get some of these common tasks done.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the whole point here is that we're doing everything we can together to put as much of the information and power of the underlying CI and CD systems into the hands of the developers, so they can make informed decisions and make the right choices as early as possible. So with that, I think we can proceed to some Q&A. I guess before we do that, I wanted to call out some things that will help you get started with this. So the link at the bottom is actually a link to the blog where we publish the sort of initial demo and release of this integration, and it has links directly to the bitbucket.org repo that I showed you at the very beginning, where the integration actually is published. Bitbucket server, the code insights documentation is linked here from Bitly, and that can give you some insight into how that works and what other integrations are available there. And then if you are not currently an Artifactory or X-Ray customer, this link here on the right allows you to get a 30-day free trial. X-Ray is in order to integrate it with Bitbucket Server Code Insights, you'll really want to use the on-prem self-hosted 30-day trial license. But we also recently launched a SaaS version of X-Ray that works with our SaaS Artifactory and also has integrations into the Bitbucket server applications. So I think with that, we're done with the main content. I think Samantha has gathered some questions from the audience that we can answer.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thank you, Alice and Craig, for a nice overview of the integration as well as the respective products from Atlassian and JFrog. We do have quite a few questions, and you guys were in terms of the attendees, went ahead and used the chat window, which is fine. It's so I've been trying to collect them all as I can and as they come in. So maybe why don't we start with just Craig? You just went over kind of how to get each of these respective parts of the integration. We have free trial available, but there was a question about whether or not there's a cost for the integration itself.
That's a great question.
So maybe you can, and maybe Alice, jump in when you feel it's appropriate to talk a bit more about Bitbucket.
Sure. So the cost of the integration is zero. It's an open source integration. I can just go take a look at it real quickly. So here on the bitbucket.org is how you get the integration. So all you need to do, you can fork this repo, you can just clone it to your local system, and what it consists of are a couple of template files. So these are the templates of the JSON that needs to be passed to the Bitbucket Code Insights API. Then there's an environment file. This is where you put your things like your keys and your endpoints and your usernames in order to authenticate to the various endpoints to JFrog Artifactory and to your Bitbucket server. And then the YAML file here is a configuration file that has sort of all the specifics about your project, and the build.sh is a shell script that is the thing that actually pulls all of that together and makes the calls to Artifactory, X-Ray, and Bitbucket using all those other files as a configuration. So it's actually pretty straightforward. I was able to set it up in a few minutes, and it's free of charge. And if you have comments, feedback, or questions on them, feel free to open issues or reach out to me directly. I'm easy to find on the internet.
And
I
I'm
didn't
happy.
know, Alice, if you wanted to add anything from kind of the Bitbucket Code Insight perspective.
Yeah, sure. So currently, Code Insights is currently only available in, what was that? Can you hear me?
I think my internet connection was unstable there for a second.
Okay.
Sorry, we didn't mean to go ahead.
No, totally fine. Troubles of live internet. So with Bitbucket Server, Code Insights is currently available in 5.15, which is our newest release. And this is Bitbucket Server, the behind the firewall version, self-installed, not SaaS. So in order to get that, you can go through the 30-day trial. You can just go download our installer. And with that, you can get a free license if you are an open source nonprofit or a classroom or university. Otherwise, you can get a $10 starter license, which will allow you to get all the functionality. You'll just need to either throw that on something like AWS or host it on your own computer. And from there, you're basically good to go. Otherwise, if you want to use the SaaS version of JFrog, you can get a free account on bitbucket.org. And pricing varies, especially if you're looking for something like build minutes or if you want to work with a larger team. But we do per user pricing for those things, unless you're using a trial developer license or you have one of the free accounts.
Okay, and a follow-up question to that is actually, when will it be available in Bitbucket Cloud?
So this is something that we're currently looking at some similar functionality for Bitbucket Cloud, and that is both something that we've collaborated with the cloud team on. I'm personally a part of the server world more than anything, but I sit next to the cloud team. And so we align somewhat on naming, but they are in progress on that, and they'll release more details as they become available. So keep an eye on the Bitbucket Twitter as well as our blog.
Great, thank you. So there was a question actually that came in with regard to GitLab, and specifically, can this feature be used, X-Ray in particular, on, for example, GitLab?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. There's no constraints exactly in how this is used. I assume that's GitLab as the CI in this case, because what we're talking about is how Artifactory works together with the Bitbucket Code Insights. So the CI of GitLab can absolutely orchestrate the connection and resolution of these dependencies just as well as any other CI system.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point with any CI server that you choose to use. Our notion is to be universal and to support whatever dev tools are currently in use, and GitLab is no exception. I guess, Alice, this is more a question for you, please. There was a question about whether or not the Bitbucket Insight or Code Insights is data center compatible.
Yeah, so this is data center compatible. We don't make a huge differentiation between how apps integrate with the server or data center deployments. The larger difference between those things is version. So this is an API that was specifically released in the 5.15 release. So if you're looking to stay a few versions back, you're probably going to have a little bit of a wait before your admins are comfortable with upgrading. And then the other normal limiting factor is just as you're looking at a larger data set, that is, you may start seeing that apps are data center approved or not. Anything that is marked as being server compatible can still be used with data center. This new data center tag that we're using is indicative of apps that have sent us performance results, and that we can show that it is going to be performant in these data center deployments. So that has a little bit more to do with data size, but I would say if something's good for server, the architecture is the same for integrating.
Thank you. There was a question that came in about having on-prem version Bitbucket and a paid account, or so a pro or enterprise version of JFrog. I think it should be easily. Well, I'll let you guys answer that question. Can it be used without any problem?
The answer is yes. If you have an on-prem version of Bitbucket and a paid account with JFrog, and Craig, correct me if I'm wrong, as long as you go through the steps to integrate those two things, then yes, you can use this experience provided that the on-prem version of Bitbucket is upgraded to 5.15.
Correct. And there's no hard distinction on the versions of Artifactory or X-Ray. I think you'll be best off past version 5.5 of Artifactory and 2.1 of X-Ray for the integration here. But beyond that, you'll be in good shape if you're running Artifactory and X-Ray yourself.
Great. Question regarding JFrog. So Craig, this for you. In terms of, do we have a plugin for Jenkins and implementing release?
In implementing release. So there is a very capable Jenkins plugin. The Jenkins plugin doesn't sort of automatically expose this capability. For example, you would simply have to insert the logic of build.sh into your Jenkins file in order to automate this. But then you could use the Jenkins plugin to do the builds and resolutions. We chose not to implement this integration using a Jenkins file because then it's specific only to Jenkins. But you can use the logic of build.sh to structure your Jenkins file and use the Jenkins plugin for Artifactory to do both the builds and the build scans from X-Ray.
Okay, thanks. This one, another specific question about Gerrit integration. Specifically, does it scan the pip packages also for CVEs?
About Gerrit integration?
Yes.
So I'm going to presume we can reach out to whoever asked that question.
Well, maybe is there a way to explain the workflow with how this would integrate with Gerrit?
That's great. I think Alice might actually have a better sort of take on that because that would be more of an integration between, say, Bitbucket and Gerrit. But I don't know if that exists.
Yeah, and Gerrit is, in some, at least to some extent, it's hard to say a competitor, but it's a Git hosting platform where you can review code and manage workflows. So my understanding is this may be someone looking to see if they can use JFrog with Gerrit as opposed to using Bitbucket. And chat, correct me if I'm wrong.
We're agnostic. Yeah, we're certainly agnostic. We really like the workflow that's enabled with Bitbucket, but you can use pretty much any Git platform you want.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. In terms of X-Ray itself, sorry, Alice, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no. The only thing I was going to touch on is just it really depends on the platform exposing APIs, which is an integration point. But as far as I know with Gerrit, that shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, thanks. Switching gears just a little bit in terms of going back to X-Ray. There was a question kind of on, it seems to me there are a few questions surrounding kind of policy management and how to set the rules for what you would be notified about with regard to X-Ray vulnerabilities and whatnot. Can you just give a very high kind of overview of what are the ways in which somebody can set those parameters?
Sure. So the first principle, and I can actually walk through it just briefly in the demo. I did kind of fly through and maybe jump around a little bit too much in that area. So the first principle is that there's permissions. There's a permissions model in X-Ray. Different users have different rights. You can set which kinds of users have the rights to create policies and who can create watches. So let's take a little look at the anatomy of a watch. So this is the thing, the entity that I used to determine whether or not my build was good. So the watch has a couple of areas. One is, it's got sort of a name and description, and then it's got a set of resources. So in this area, I can actually control which of these are all resources in Artifactory. Which of the builds and repositories is this watch related to? So if I wanted to apply the same set of policies to more than one build, I can control which builds these policies apply to. In this case, I'm not going to do that for now. And then I have a set of policies that apply to those sets of builds. In this case, I'm focused very much on builds just for the sake of sort of conceptual clarity. And then I can manage which policies apply to those resources. So I created a couple of policies that I'd called nightly security and nightly license policies. And this is as somebody who, the role of somebody who has sort of security oversight over my build process. So depending on the size of your team and the structure of your company, the person who does this, may be a security expert. It may be a developer enabler or tools enabler who works closely with the security team to design the policies and determine where in the software development lifecycle those policies should be applied. But fundamentally, it's somebody who's responsible for doing that. So you can manage policies and assign policies to as many watches as it makes sense. In this case, all of my policies are applied to only one watch, but it's very flexible in the sense that I can create a policy that's a license policy, and I can apply that to any number of watches. And then you can, you have sort of very fine-grained or very coarse control over where those things go, depending on how you design your watches. So one of the things that's complicated here is that you have to have some opinion going in from the beginning about how to structure watches and policies against the resources in Artifactory. And the JFrog team and our solution engineers specifically are here to help you in that process.
Great. And related to X-Ray, there are a few questions that have come up regarding Jira. And so what kind of notification or integration with Jira can be done with regard to X-Ray or with regard to, in general, the integration of Bitbucket Code Insight and Jira?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start with X-Ray. So actually I should just show that screen. So in X-Ray, when you create a policy, I actually don't have this configured at this point, but when I create a policy and a rule, one of the things I can do with that rule is trigger a webhook. So if I had a webhook configured to the Jira API, I can easily have this, an invocation of this policy, create a Jira ticket with all of the relevant information from the policy violation, as well as the link back to X-Ray so I can get more information. So that's kind of the current lightweight integration that we have possible today. We're exploring together with Atlassian doing more of a sort of opinionated workflow around that. That's sort of the X-Ray Jira side of it. Alice, do you want to talk about Bitbucket Jira?
Sure. And someone even touched on whether or not you can use other issue tools other than Jira, but from the and actually, sorry, I'm going to walk that back for a second. What was the original context? I can just touch on that and not go too far into the weeds.
I think it was more the latter of what you were just about to bring up. If Jira is the only option, and I think that has to be considered that this is Atlassian, so Jira is probably the primary first choice, but are there other tools, tracking system tools that can be used aside from Jira?
Yeah, so in Bitbucket Cloud, you can use something like Trello, and it's technically possible to use any other tracking tool. It's basically up to having an API and either finding a pre-existing integration or building one yourself. And honestly, have fun because that's its own barrel of monkeys. But with Jira and Bitbucket specifically, either the cloud or the server version, those are very deep insofar as you're going to get a more integrated feeling and experience between Jira and Bitbucket versus Jira and GitHub or GitLab. And the reason for that is because literally the teams that work on Jira and Bitbucket, their PMs sit on the same floor in the same office. And so when we're working on some of these features, and we even have a dedicated team specifically for native integrations. So when they're working on these things, they go directly to the teams and they say, help me understand how this works. And we dog food all of our products. So what you end up with is a sidebar that links directly from the repo that you're working in to your Kanban board or your sprint board, or to a Confluence space. With Jira, you can link projects together so that and you can also link workflows together. So as a PR is opened and then closed, that can progress the state of a ticket. So you're never having to jump into Jira to make those transitions. With something like Smart Commits in Bitbucket, you can do time tracking, and so that can list that time spent working on a given ticket, which can help with future estimates or can help you deal with whoever your program manager is at the time. And then you can also jump into things like a structured branches, branch naming or bug fixes. And all of that can just help you have more visibility and consistency across the organization. And then when you're looking at being able to create tasks or issues, you can do that all straight from the pull request experience. So really the idea is we want developers to be able to stay closer to code, and we want them to be able to work efficiently. No one became a developer or an engineer because they wanted to spend their entire day in Jira or in meetings. And maybe you don't want to have to fight with your compiler or your terminal anyway, but that's where we're trying to let you make the decision. It's a little bit less time spent in our UIs and a little bit more time spent doing what you want.
Makes sense. A question about Python projects. Are there any details or is there any information that you can showcase about this integration, these tools with regard to Python projects? And either one, Craig and or Alice.
So I happen to do it using a Maven build, and that's the build that's in the integration by default. But a Python build from a sort of Artifactory X-ray perspective is no different. You get exactly the same value whether you're doing Python or NuGet or Node.js, right? So it's very flexible with respect to the package types. As long as it's a package type that's supported by X-ray scan, and those are all documented on our website and also listed in the UI.
Yep, makes sense. And so same notion of being able to integrate with multiple CI server tools that your teams or that you might be using, same notion for package types that you might be developing with. In terms of, there was a specific question about build.sh. Does this mean that it only works on Linux?
So the integration will work on any platform. The bash script that we created has been tested on Linux. There's no reason that it shouldn't work on Linux-compatible shells on other platforms.
It should work on both Mac OS, OS X if you're on an older version, as well as Bash for Windows if you have Ubuntu installed.
Correct.
Awesome, thank you. So there are a few questions with regard to pricing. So from the JFrog side, all pricing that we have for all of our products is listed on jfrog.com. Just select the product that you're interested to have a look at.
Yep.
But Alice, I don't know if you can provide any details, not details, but where somebody can find more information specifically about Bitbucket, on-prem server versions, whatnot, that we can just throw a link up real quick.
Yeah, sure. So the on-prem versions, you can either go to bitbucket.org and go to the Enterprise tab, and alternatively, you can go to Atlassian.com and you'll be able to find details about both Bitbucket Server as well as Cloud. We have all of our pricing. Go ahead.
I just went to the wrong link.
Craig's trying to
I'm trying to help, but I'm not doing a very good job.
Here, I'll drop a link in chat for Atlassian.
that'd be great.
Yeah,
that would be perfect.
But yeah, all of our pricing is online. You'll never have to call for pricing. So if you're looking to investigate it, you can get that starter license and vet it out, and build a quote, send it to your boss, whatever. But let me get that link real fast, drop into chat. I was mostly talking to take up time for that.
No problem. And there was kind of a follow-up set of questions with regard to whether, on-prem Bitbucket can be used as an enterprise tool, or is it team only or team level only? Maybe if those details are also available in the link that you're going to share, just to give somebody a sense. It sounds like from a sizing perspective, that might be helpful.
Yeah, and it is touched on, but I want to give a couple of numbers just to contextualize, because you look at a marketing site and it's hard to tell who it'll be intended for. The largest Bitbucket deployment that I know of has 30,000 licensed users. I know of other deployments that have 3 sets of 15,000 each. And that's a company that you know of, but I can't disclose the name of. And we also have publicly available numbers, and I will drop a link to that blog post so you can see how large of repos we handle, as well as repo counts, and then the average pull requests and pull request comments per day for instances of 9,000 to 10,000 users.
That would be helpful, I think. So switching back over to you, Craig, specifically about JFrog, there were a few questions, 2 questions in particular that asked kind of at a high level, what can JFrog products be used for? It sounds like somebody who's not familiar with Artifactory, not familiar with X-Ray. I think this is going to the question of, why do I need to care about managing my binaries when I have source code and a way to manage that source code?
That's a great question. So I'll try to hit on that real quickly, since we're actually getting towards the end of the hour. We have an hour allocated for this, right? So logged in, I guess. So let me do the super quick overview. So Artifactory is a universal repository manager. And what does that mean? That means that it provides a platform that in which you can create, I'll just show you in the UI, I can create repositories that of many different types. So these are all of the different repository types that Artifactory supports. Everything from Chef, so if you want to manage your recipes, to RPMs, Vagrant files, Puppet scripts, Helm charts for Kubernetes applications, Go version modules, large file system for Git, Ruby gems, Docker images, you have it. So, one way to think of this is, somebody asked about Python, right? We support Python, PyPy, and PHP Composer. You as an enterprise, you have several needs. You have the need to assure that the content that you create as an enterprise is protected from an intellectual property perspective, and that your developers can effectively collaborate. So in environments where you have people who have shared dependencies that are internal across multiple organizations, you need a place to put those packages where only those people have access to the things that are your private packages. These are not the source code. That's what Bitbucket does, or GitLab, or GitHub. But in this case, we really want to focus on Bitbucket. And then when you do your build, the output of those needs to be access controlled, versioned, have storage management put on it. We have a lot of our customers that are many tens of terabytes to petabytes of packages that they keep for all kinds of purposes. And then Artifactory provides you a central way to do access control, audit control, and exposure of that. So that's the sort of private side. Then the public side is, actually I'll take a look at a virtual repository to kind of talk about the public side. So a virtual repository allows me to bundle together multiple Docker repositories. So this Docker registry looks like a single private Docker registry to the developer, it actually is a remote proxy for Bintray. It can be for, this is Docker Hub. And then it has private registries as well that cover different stages of the lifecycle. So this particular virtual repository allows me to read from any of those registries, and it has a priority order, and write to Docker local, and then that triggers workflow to determine what's going on. So this allows me as an enterprise to have a lot of control over which Docker images are being used in which context. That not only provides me security, like I can watch the Docker images that are coming from Docker Hub and put security scanning on those and not allow download or use of ones that violate my policies. It also allows me to have a local cache for very fast builds. So Artifactory as an enterprise universal repository manager also supports replication across multiple geographies. So if I need my RPMs to be local in all my data centers, Artifactory allows me to do that, as well as have Docker registries in whatever data centers make sense, and replicate the repos that have the Docker images I need in different places. So in summary, there's security, access control, audit, storage management, and locality and performance are kind of the big use cases for a repository manager. Hopefully that hit the
nail on the head. No, I think that covered it very nicely. 2 minutes left. One last question, Alice. You're saying that Code Insights is just included for current Bitbucket users, correct?
Yeah, so as long as you are on the latest version, which is Bitbucket 5.15, which we released last week, the week before that, somewhere in the last 2 weeks. As long as you have upgraded to that version or higher, then you will be able to use this feature. And yes, that is included in the Bitbucket server or Bitbucket data center, so the on-premise version. It is not yet available in cloud, but we're looking at a similar feature.